All right, hello, welcome back to Spill the Popcorn. I'm Alec,
I'm Cameron.
and today we're going to be talking about Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. All right, so today we just watched the 2022 reboot of Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. I had already seen it once before. It was his first time, but I guess my second impression would be that it was still just as funny as the first time. I know he's going to say probably some more critical things, but I watched this movie on a rainy day just for fun, and I thought it was awesome. Really liked the concept. It's just like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but in a more modern, almost critical context. And I don't know. I just thought I thought it had a lot of good moments, and I just really liked the format. I thought they did a lot with. I thought they did more than they had to. I'll expand on that later, but let's hear what you think.
Well, I don't know why you would necessarily be expecting me to be more critical of it than you were. This one, it did not take itself seriously at all. It knew exactly what it was doing. It didn't pretend to be doing anything else, and it delivered on basically all of the promises it implicitly made. I would agree with you insofar as they actually did put a little bit more effort into the story than I would have expected them to. It was super generic. It was a cookie cutter plot. It was very predictable. It's everything you would expect from a movie like this, but that didn't bother me because I was not expecting anything else, and the filmmakers were not encouraging us to expect anything else. I agree that it was pretty funny at times. A lot of the humor, maybe not a lot, some of the humor was pretty juvenile. It obviously drew some inspiration on a conceptual level from like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I feel like there may have been a little bit of like some BoJack Horseman in there as well. I don't know if I'm reading too far into that, but I mean like even Will Arnett, he was a member of the voice cast. It was fun, I guess, and I wasn't expecting anything more than that. I got exactly that and maybe a little bit more. I just really enjoyed watching it. I don't think it really even dragged at any parts. The primary critique I would have to bring up where the movie's comedy is concerned is it wasn't quite sure who his audience was. Like we said a second ago, it's pretty similar to Roger Rabbit on a conceptual level. It's a little bit less dark and a little bit less suggestive than Who Framed Roger Rabbit. There were times at which it seemed like they were opting more for a Roger Rabbit-esque tone, and then there were other times at which it seemed more like they were holding back when they could have gone in, when they could have continued to go in that direction. So it kind of seemed like they weren't quite sure of the extent to which the story was supposed, or the comedy was supposed to be targeted at people who had seen the original, or who had grown up with the like original Chip and Dale cartoons, and people who were just watching the movie because they knew it was, or like children who were watching the movie because like the range of things they can watch is limited. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'll say a couple things to that. One, I think this is purely my opinion. I feel like when parents went to movies back then, it was a little more like raunchy humor towards the parents and less like situational humor, if that makes sense. So like in this one, a lot of the adult humor, for lack of a better word, because it wasn't super like sexual or anything, but a lot of the less juvenile humor was more in like delivery of lines and just like some of the physical comedy about the puppets, because that's one of the things I really liked about this one is that, you know, they had a couple, you know, butt and fart jokes in there, but I feel like puppets moving and talking funny, and
like the Uncanny Valley stuff.
And the Uncanny Valley stuff, and like the Officer Putty, like a claymation character who has a horror movie-esque final scene. I like that stuff. I feel like is perfectly universal humor. Like it's.
Yeah, I mean, those were my favorite elements of the movie comedy-wise. I mean, I thought they did that stuff pretty well. There were, like I said, a couple of moments where I just kind of rolled my eyes a little bit, but
I actually think they went about the target audience thing pretty well. I would say, you know, like most kids' movies, besides like the super young ones, this was a family movie. So you had to have a mix of, you know, a piece of the kids, a piece of the parents. And I personally didn't take issue with the kids' jokes. One, because I knew, well, okay, let me start with this. I didn't know anything about Chip and Dale before going into this movie.
Yeah, I mean that was. I don't know if you could say it was a generation before us, but that was. We were kind of born after.
Yeah.
Too late to kind of have grown up with that kind of thing. Yeah.
I went into this movie knowing nothing, expecting nothing, thinking it was going to be a brain dead movie that I could just turn my head off for an hour and a half. But I actually went and I watched it again with you because I enjoyed it so much the first time. And so I think it could have been really bad. Because it could have been like, oh, this is for the OG Chip and Dale fans. We're going to throw in a ton of nostalgia.
Pure fan service.
Yeah.
There was a lot I have to imagine there was a lot of fan service. Again, I wouldn't have picked up on a lot of that just because.
But that's where I was going with that because it still worked even though I knew nothing about the franchise. I feel like they dropped in enough references to themselves to make it...
meta references.
Yeah, yes. The movie was super self-aware, super meta, and I think it did that super well. And even went so far as to bring people like me who didn't know anything about it into the community a little bit. So I think it's funny that they basically seem to know they're taking a franchise that no one really knows about anymore and just doing whatever they wanted with it. They basically, it seemed like they were commenting on the fact that Chip and Dale are kind of washed up characters in real life and then made them washed up characters in the show.
Yeah, I kind of liked how they factored that into the story and how they kind of made a joke out of it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and all the stuff about we should make a Chip and Dale reboot when this is a Chip and Dale reboot.
Yeah,
I just thought like,
and how unnecessary a Chip and Dale reboot would be.
Yes, that no one asked for it because no one knows who they are, and yet they still ended up making a fun movie.
Yeah, obviously we're in the midst of like the era of reboots and kind of just like what people may consider like the death of original storytelling. That's dramatic, I think. But, it feels like a lot of filmmakers, if not to, it's possible that people are just capitalizing on that in a kind of, unintentionally ironic way. But it feels like a lot of people nowadays are kind of acknowledging that and making a joke out of it. This is like a good example of a movie that is centered around something like that. I feel like people are going to start doing that more and more as people get more and more tired of like soulless reboots and cash grabs, stuff like that just capitalize on nostalgia. But yeah, I feel like I have to imagine people are going to start like more meta stories like this, or meta stories like this are going to become increasingly popular in the next few years, and then they're going to kind of fizzle out, and people are going to get tired of those as well. So I feel like this particular movie, this particular story was told at just the right time. Filmmaking goes through eras and then like reactive eras. Like right now we're in the superhero era, right? With all the Marvel movies coming out and then DC trying to keep up. And then I feel like a good example of a reaction is like The Boys. The Boys, yeah, that's the
first
thing I would
think of. Take what everyone likes and they make a satire out of it that still capitalizes on the genre.
Yeah.
While also...
Or the popularity of the genre. I almost feel like this movie and movies of its ilk were not made to be analyzed. They were just made to be watched and enjoyed on rainy days.
But there's so many ways that they could go wrong. You can make a movie that's just meant to be entertaining and get lost in the idea that you wanted or that you didn't care about the story in the beginning, right? You can go in and say, okay, this one's just going to be a popcorn movie. But then if you lean too hard into that, it's going to be like soulless, basically. And you can tell, no.
It still has to be engaging to be entertaining.
I feel like it's very easy to do that wrong because a lot of kids' movies these days, I feel like, focus more on making jokes than they do with being funny, if that makes sense. So it's all about this leads to this punchline, this leads to this punchline, and it'll make the kids giggle, but eventually it's like headache-inducing for anybody else watching it, right? But what I liked about this one is that they put a lot of care into like the more visual, physical, subtle aspects. So like
of the comedy.
Yeah, even if they're just doing some exposition, they'll walk past the Squidward's
Hollywood
star fame.
Or Walk of Fame star.
Yeah. Or there'll be a poster of Dobby on a Gucci ad in the back. Where like someone put that in there, but they're not like turning the audience's head and making them point to it, right? Or pointing to it and making them stare at it, like slamming them over the head. Like there's not really a joke ever made about Officer Putty, right? No one ever, well, maybe there are jokes made about him, but what's funny about him is that he acts funny. And they never really slam you over the head with that, they just make him act funny.
If you were to evaluate this movie in terms of the visual element, what would you say?
I think the most impressive visual aspect was the fact that they were able to mix 2D animation, 3D animation, and live action, and like stop motion too with Officer Putty.
And make things like conspicuously like disturbing in terms of like the uncanny valley stuff.
Yeah, I think they did a great job making everything look exactly how they wanted.
Yeah.
I also never found it distracting. This also factors into like the narrative part, but I also appreciate how the visual aspects were all addressed in the story and modernized within the narrative. So like
It was factored into the world building.
yes, they were not only able to achieve what they wanted stylistically, but they used the visual genre to enhance the narrative. So in terms of visuals, I'm going to give it an A. The style was super ambitious, never distracting, and it was always funny.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the comedic appeal of the movie can be attributed to the way in which certain things were animated, like Seth Rogen's Uncanny Valley Dwarf. Like, that was funny. I think there are a lot of areas in which, or there are a lot of points at which the animation could have been distracting or obtrusive, or it could have detracted from the quality of the experience at large. But I agree with you insofar as you said that was never like an issue.
I think the best part about the visual aspect was, like, for example, there's a scene where a Muppet is talking to two cartoons, one 2D, one 3D, but they're all in the real world. What's so impressive about the visuals of this movie is that they made you not even think about them.
So if I were to evaluate the visual element of the movie with all those things in mind, I would have to give it an A. It was never distracting, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do.
Which, I have to assume, not being a professional animator, was harder than it looks.
Yes.
So in terms of acting, I guess if I were to evaluate, like you said, it was a cookie cutter plot which doesn't give a lot of room for masterclass performances. However, I thought John Mulaney and Andy Samberg did a great job.
I agree.
It was clear that they thought their lines were funny, which, isn't always the case in kids' movies.
Yeah.
I thought the weakest part was the human element. So, like, Ellie, I will say, again, I'm not an actor, but I have to assume it's significantly harder to act to a bunch of animated characters than to other people.
Yeah.
Which she was doing the entire time. So I'm going to cut her some slack there. She also just wasn't given a lot of funny lines. She was the straight man, more or less, who just helped push along the plot.
I think she was appropriately cheesy, though, when she needed to be.
Yeah. But I'm not using her to detract from the acting. I thought J.K. Simmons was awesome. I thought Will Arnett did great. Basically, I'll summarize this. No one was trying to make this the best movie of their career. But I don't think anyone phoned it in either. A lot of the movie was funny because of the acting, especially like the Muppet who like sings to himself. And so for that, I'll give it a B, because a B is passing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's much more for me to say than what you've already said. I pretty much agree with you on every point that you brought up where the acting is concerned. I think on a comedic level, everyone did a really good job, with the potential exception of Ellie. But again, she didn't have a whole lot to work with. I think she did a decent job with what she did have to work with. And just to reiterate what I said a second ago when I kind of interrupted you, I think she was appropriately cheesy when she needed to be. I liked that they had Will Arnett playing a washed-up celebrity. There weren't that many if there were any dramatic moments that gave the actors or the voice actors in most cases a chance to kind of display their range, or showcase a chance to showcase their range. In this respect as well, the movie did exactly what it was trying to do and nothing more. So I'll give it a B, just like you.
So in terms of narrative,
I feel like it's kind of difficult to evaluate this movie on a narrative level just because it didn't take itself even remotely seriously. If I were to evaluate the movie on a narrative level, just to be completely fair to the other movies I have seen that are better, of which there are many, maybe a B minus. I don't think anybody was shooting for the moon. The moon was definitely not hit, but I think the mark was hit. If that makes any sense.
See, I think that's where I'm gonna have to disagree with you. Like, you focus a lot on the script, and I agree the script is important, but I also think novelty and creativity
It was
are
very creative,
super
I think.
important.
Yeah.
Basically, what I'm trying to say is this movie was super creative, even if it was cookie cutter in terms of overall story. Like, the story may have been done before, but it's never been done in this way, except with Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But honestly, that could almost work in its favor because the whole movie is about being unoriginal, but it's about being unoriginal in an original way. And I just really like that. I honestly thought this movie received way more attention than most movies I've seen recently.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to agree with that, actually.
I just really, really appreciated the amount of attention to detail. I know that goes back to visual, kind of, but it also applies to the narrative.
Yeah.
And you know what? I also thought that they added a good amount of actual character development.
Yeah.
Like, you knew by the end of the movie who Dale was, who Chip was. They weren't one-dimensional.
They felt like they had a life beyond the screen.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a lot of good world building, as we already said, but to the point of having life beyond the screen. But also just, you cared about the characters. And so I guess I would give it an A minus on narrative. So, like, if I were to give this movie an overall rating, I'd give it somewhere in the A minus to B plus range, just because it has a lot of positives going for it. But I will have to knock it down just a little bit, just because it's not like, my top 10 movies all time.
Even if it wasn't like completely original on a narrative level, there was a lot of stylistic uniqueness that I appreciate and that contributed to my overall experience in such a way that I felt better after I watched the movie than I did before, and I think there's something to be said about that, or there's something to be said for that. So, yeah, I mean, I had a good time watching it. There was nothing in there that really bothered me or, seemed like it was out of place, I should say. So I think if I were to evaluate if I were to give a holistic evaluation of the movie, I'd probably say it has earned a solid B.
All right, so we've got a B on your end, like a B plus to A minus on mine. I guess that concludes reviews for Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers 2022. Once again, I'm Alec.
I'm Cameron.
And this has been another episode of Spill the Popcorn.
So obviously like and subscribe and let us know what you want us to review next in the comments below. Thank you.
All right, thank you.